For more, we can bring in Peter Zalmayev, Director of the Eurasian Democracy Initiative, who joins us from Kyiv. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24 today. Now, it's been 10 days, over 10 days, that Kyiv launched this invasion, this incursion into Kursk, whatever you call it. Do we know what's behind Kyiv's thinking?
Well, officially we don't, but at least we have an official confirmation that it is indeed Ukrainian troops. And even if you had asked me about a week ago what the plans were, I would have said probably stick around for maybe a couple of more days, show up Vladimir Putin's regime for what it is, a colossus on clay of feet, with porous, undefended borders, and idée fixe, and a fixation and an obsession with Ukraine so much that Vladimir Putin does not bother to defend his own borders. But right now, I see the intention is to try to get entrenched in Russia's territory in order to use it as a bargaining chip in eventual negotiations with the Russian side. You leave the Kharkiv region, we leave Kursk. Also, it's lifted our morale, the morale of the fighting troops and people behind the front line, who have been in need of good news for a long while. This is a very daring, risky, but a daring move that has lifted hearts here in Ukraine. But once again, the end goal we don't know yet, and maybe that is part of the design. The secrecy in which this operation was conducted was in secret not only to the Russians but to most Ukrainians. I would imagine that only a very tight circle of individuals know of the eventual goal of this daring operation.
Peter, you said it could potentially be used as a bargaining chip. So essentially, what Kyiv would essentially take control of a chunk of Russian territory the size of what Russia has annexed of Ukraine and potentially Crimea, and say, okay, now let's swap?
This could be, once again, the numbers simply bear this out. There are the reinforcements that have arrived in the last few days. I think, we can now talk about at least 10,000 Ukrainian troops present there, as many as 80 population settlements occupied, and maybe an advance as far as 30 kilometers inside Russia's territory. So that may actually be the case. Also, the Ukrainians we're waiting to see if the Russians start withdrawing their battle-hardened troops from the hottest points of the front, including Toretsk and Pokrovsk in the Donbass, to try to kick the Ukrainians out. If that happens, that will also have been justified because the Ukrainians are bleeding quite heavily. Russians are advancing. Pokrovsk is a key place to hold, and a lot is riding on Ukraine's ability to keep it. So far hasn't happened. We're seeing that Russians are continuing the tempo of their advance, but they are finally starting to withdraw their troops elsewhere, including in Kharkiv. So maybe the strategy is slowly but surely working out.
Peter, Russia has already started to say NATO weaponry is being used on its territory by Ukrainian troops. We've often heard about red lines by NATO states. Is this not a red line?
We have official statements from the Pentagon and other ministries of defense. They're saying that this is not really an offensive operation. This is largely a defense operation. Most Ukrainian allies have vocally stood behind Ukraine's decision to do this. And in fact, we are hoping that in the remaining months of Joe Biden in the White House, and he's announced that in an interview to the Financial Times, that he will concentrate on bolstering security relations with both Ukraine and Taiwan, that finally the White House will be persuaded to lift this ridiculous limitation and on Ukraine's ability to use its weapons against Russia. I mean, it already is inside Russia. If it is enabled to use some of the America-provided weaponry, I think it could develop this operation into a strategic success.
We have some reports that some British tanks may potentially being used in this operation. But for instance, if Ukraine starts using the F-16s, which it has received, that would potentially ruffle further feathers in Russia, won't it?
Well, Well, I mean, the feathers have been ruffled. I don't know which other feathers remain that are unruffled, and I think that's also part of the importance of this operation. It is showing to our Western allies first that Ukraine is able to stage daring offensive operations, offensive defensive operations, and that there are no red lines really to cross. Do not be afraid of Kremlin's red lines. We're already in Russia's territory, fighting with some of the Western provided tanks, as you mentioned. And what? According to Russia's nuclear doctrine, they're supposed to respond to it with a nuclear strike. Instead, we don't hear a nuclear rhetoric at all. There was a stoppage to all nuclear rhetoric. Now that Russia is sensing that, it's here, it's there, it has to put its money where its mouth is, and all of a sudden it's showing lack of resolve on that issue. So this is very important, and I think it should embolden our Western allies to give Ukraine all its that it needs to kick the Russians out of its territory.
Peter, we have, you mentioned President Biden. His term is coming to an end shortly. We're not sure who's going to come out on top in November, of course. Could this be why Ukraine launched this incursion now, and not just because the weather is about to change?
Well, I mean, I think the main goal has been to reassure its Western allies that Ukraine is capable not only of constantly crying, we need more weapons, please help us. No one likes this sort of attitude, and people get tired. It's a part of human psychology. People like a success story, and reading Western press and analyses, while most analysts will tell you that this is a risky operation, still a lot of folks have been heartened, and I think this should encourage the West to step up its support of Ukraine.
Peter Zalmayev, thank you very much for joining us on the program today.